Hi, Aisha,
Hey, Aiko. Good to
and
see
hi, everybody.
you.
Thanks. Welcome to our podcast, Deep Listening. I don't know how many times we've done this, maybe four times, right? We have.
Yeah, I think this is five. I think we recorded a couple that we're not uploading. Yeah.
So today we're thinking about talking about something that we talked about just off podcast, which got me interested when, so Aisha had been reading some books. And one day she commented, I think I had some kind of a difficulty with somebody. And then she just said, well, every time, you encounter somebody, you're meeting part of yourself. And it just seems like, in the sort of a spiritual learning, teaching community, that is like, mirroring or projection and all that. But when you said that one day, I just love that the sound of, this one sentence you said. Yeah, every time you see somebody, you meet somebody, you encounter somebody, you're just meeting part of yourself.
Mhm.
And you know how it is, like when somebody put it in a certain way, it's just like bing,
Yeah. Yeah.
like
Yeah.
it's yeah. So I just thought that would be really great to talk about. And I don't know how we want to, start with that
Yeah.
conversation, but
Yeah. I'll start with just saying that when you say that back to me and I hear it from you, it's touched my heart because I think there's such poignancy in there.
yeah,
It's just so touching that we're encountering ourselves
right.
and we could hate ourselves or we could love ourselves. We can
Mhm.
judge ourselves or we can just think we're just so beautiful,
Mhm.
right? I've been telling you about the YouTube channel Soft White Underbelly that I've been watching,
Mhm.
and this is something that's very intriguing to me. A mutual friend of ours and I talk about uh, uh, like empathy a lot, and because she's very empathetic, but her approach to empathy is to sort of take on and feel everything. It's like, oh, my heart's breaking, like that kind of
Yeah.
feeling. And I'm always a little intrigued by that because I think of myself as very empathetic, but I don't let my heart break that easily, right? And I was watching this. It's like this very dark stuff that this guy's interviewing people on Skid Row and all kinds of, uh, prostitutes and sex workers, drug addicts. And he interviewed this one former transgender man, and the story this man revealed of being sexually abused when he was a young person so violently and having these repressed memories come up. It just really, just his courage and his resilience touched me so much, and I didn't really start breaking down and crying. Maybe I cried a little bit, but something about it was just showed me how unkind judgment is.
Mhm.
It, but that it's an unkindness. I don't even know where I'm going with what I'm saying, but it is a couple places. There's just such a that he was showing me something about my judging mind and my unkindness,
Mhm.
and he was showing me something about my resilience and my beauty.
Mhm.
And I just felt this sort of empathy or love, or I just felt like I was changed a little bit by hearing him. It's not
Mhm.
something I say that easily, and it wasn't like cataclysmic, but there was something about that moment of listening to this person's story and seeing that I might judge somebody on surface appearance, and knowing better than that, right? You know me, I'm talking about compassion left and right, and I'm talking about, you know, I understand we judge, so it's not like I want to criticize us for judging. It's just where we are. But you know, it's just it was just a powerful kind of a subtle but powerful moment. And then that's where my mind goes when we think about we're meeting parts of ourselves.
Yeah.
Like I was meeting a whole bunch of parts of myself in listening to this man, you know. I was meeting the judge, and I was meeting the lover, and I was meeting the survivor, you know. So beautiful, you know. And I just like, yeah, that there was all of these things that are in me and in him, and he was just teaching me and reminding me, you know. And I don't know. You can respond if you have some thoughts. I don't know what else to say at the moment.
Yeah, I just had this thought. I wonder, I mean, that was your reaction, to this video, right? This person talking, and it'll be interesting to know what other reactions people will have, right? Depending on who's watching it, who's listening to it. And to me, like, because you're able to listen so deeply, and then also you're open to really open to the idea of finding yourself, through communicating with other people. You were able to access all those things, right? Because depends on, like, you were saying earlier about your friend who is very empathetic. And since I was little, I had that problem too. I feel what other people feel so much, how painful that might be, how horrible that might be. And I was not able to differentiate, who's experiencing this thing, right? And I'm like totally right now learning to differentiate. Because sometimes yes, you can be empathetic, but then if you can't separate yourself and the other, you might be blind to something. But it's really, or you can't be there for that person even, because you're already suffering, from empathizing this other person. But if you can differentiate but feel compassionate towards this person and have the capacity to be like open to learn about ourselves, myself from this other person, and being able to distinguish who's who, that's when I'm able to be there for that person.
Yeah. I mean, excuse me, it's sort of interesting, to think about that, when, especially with the statement, like when we were always only meeting parts of ourselves, because does that mean it's literal? And I'm going to say that it actually is literal, and yet it's not literal. This is actually a part of it. So you've heard this saying in spiritual circles, like, there's only one. There's just this sort of like, as if we're a mirror, and there's this all these shattered reflections back at us, like literally, like that, as well as figuratively. That we have separate bodies. And Byron Katie likes to say, there's a reason why we have separate bodies, right? So there's some truth to that. We're separate, right? So I don't, I find that intriguing just as a question, because I don't even know the answer to it. I mean, I think people could try to pose an answer. I mean, answer it, but I think it's a question to ask and explore. And your energetic approach is to take it in and think it's you. And my energetic approach is to kind of a little bit less take it in, but I still experience it. Or I think I've done it where I felt it so much I didn't even realize I was feeling it. I felt people's energies a lot and taken them into my body, but didn't even realize it. Just totally thought it was me, you know. And I've learned to separate a little bit of that. But it's just yeah.
Yeah. And then another thought that I had was, it's only when we're ready to listen to the other person, we can really see ourselves in them, right? Like, or that we're ready to see ourselves in the other person. Because if you're not ready to be there and then just take in what the other person's saying in a deeper way, we would just react. And then we forget to realize, oh, this is part of me that I'm looking at. And so I guess the first thing is, I mean, if one is interested in learning things like this, is again, we come back to that listening, listen to the other person. That only gives us like this, listening is almost like this pause to really take in everything. And then that's when we start to go, oh, I'm really, looking at part of myself through this person, right? But if it was all about speaking or interjecting or commenting, without really listen, then we won't be able to come to that understanding of, oh, is this a part of me, that I'm witnessing or what I'm experiencing. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I'm also practicing at the same time that you're talking, because I've been thinking about this, like we are talking about a podcast of deep listening. So we're on the spot in a way to be better listeners, right? And I think that we have to it's a growth process. And I notice in my mind when I distract, and as you're speaking, I'm trying to embody what you're speaking right now, like deep listening deeply. And I realize that I think I can sometimes, but a lot of times I'm still wanting to be able to respond. Right. So I'm not fully relaxed, because I think the deep listening is about a deep receptivity. It's like you surrender yourself. And to surrender myself, I have to sort of surrender something about having to respond.
Yeah.
And the understand, you were saying, try to you're trying to understand your friend, but then it leaves you in a vulnerable place.
Yeah.
Because you might not have a response.
Right.
And that's very intriguing. So as you were listening, I'm trying to go deeper into listening or not have a response like, oh, we're on a podcast, we better have something interesting to say. I better have a question. Oh no, what if I forget what I'm supposed to say and it goes to silence? Well, it's sort of interesting. So yeah. So I think, like, I've said to you before, this idea of a podcast around deep listening is intriguing because it is about the content. It's about the practice, the two of us two together. And it's about the learning and the opening to something deeper.
Yeah.
I'm also reminded of the Patricia Albert's work, right, about the evolutionary collective I mentioned to you. But there's this spot that people are asked to go into includes really not being in that place where you're not you're both there together in a spot, in a new space that you've created yourselves, or you actually entered it. It's not a, how do I describe it? I can't describe it that well because I don't know how well I know it, but just that it's not a thing you talk about. It's a thing, it's a space you enter.
Mm-hmm.
And you're actually in the same place now. You're not two people having the experience of one place. You're experiencing the place together. Or maybe you still are two people, but you're now inside this space and you both know you're in this place. You're not talking about it, you're in it.
Right.
And as you were talking, I was starting to feel that as I was letting myself enter more into the listening.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. There it is. Like,
Yeah, right.
There was something I wanted to say that, you know, sometimes like, when we were doing that presence process by Michael Brown, this book called The Presence Process. So there is the, not mantra, but what this does he
Conscious
call it?
response, he calls it. Conscious response.
Conscious response, yeah. So that could be a great conscious response, right? Like every time I meet somebody, I'm meeting part of myself.
Yeah.
Like if I just sort of, said to myself here and there during the day, and then if I encounter my husband or my son or a friend, I'm already there.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, this is like I'm able to learn who I am, what the part of myself that I have through this person,
Yeah.
that just kind of slows down the process of interaction. And
Yeah.
I remember when my husband and I were doing this, excuse me, therapy or counseling, she talked about pause a lot, just pausing, because we're just so quick to react.
Right.
And that's our habit, when we listen to something, we're listening because so that we can respond. Or we're already looking for something to say while the other person is saying, or it's just the habitual thing that we learn throughout our childhood and adulthood. And if we can just pause, like just stop, even like when somebody said something, I have this need to just go, yeah, and then make another comment, right? But if it feels very uncomfortable to just go, and not say something because I don't want the other person to feel like, oh, she has nothing to say, or
Right.
something like that.
Right.
But that pause is important so that we can just go, yeah, I just listened to the other person, I took it in. And then I can make a decision to say something or not say something, or make a decision to go, wow, I think that I'm listening to this person being this or that way, but what part of me is this? Or there are all these choices that you can make, which is really cool. But the reality is I can't always, I get swallowed by this reaction, or interaction and reaction. And it's like, it's usually the aftermath. It's like, oh, I totally reacted, but okay, I judge that person by, her doing this thing, what is that showing me? But it's always the aftermath that I start to think, well,
Yeah.
not always. I've been kind of successful of sort of seeing the interaction from a little more, like third person's point of view here and there.
Yeah. Yeah. You've mentioned that. And I think that's best that we can do is that growing awareness.
Yeah.
Not to be perfect in it right now, just because we have an intellectual understanding of it. It's that growing awareness is that as long as awareness is growing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a couple of thoughts are coming to me. Again, the practice of listening, because there's a couple of places where my mind got, okay, I make a note of that or make a note of that, but my memory is changing so that I don't hold on to those things.
Yeah.
And so I don't remember them.
Mm-hmm.
But that could be a good thing too, because I don't know that I need to remember them, because the experience that I want is to be able to deepen into listening. But the thought I had that I think is worth asking, a question I had was, when we're saying we're listening, what are we listening to?
Right.
And so if it's all about the conceptual, the words, then of course you feel like you have to respond. But if you're listening to the energy, if you're listening to something beyond concepts and words, or that's just part of it, because you've heard of that, like how much of communication is 70-80% is nonverbal.
Right.
So if you're listening for that, and the invisible, not even nonverbal, there's invisible energetics, right? That the average person doesn't see that well. Some people can, but we don't. If we're listening, and by listening I mean receiving,
Mm-hmm.
I want to say that that's what I'm talking. What are we receiving when we are are are, are listening?
Right.
Then it becomes a different picture. It's something
Yeah.
different.
Yeah.
Then maybe we could relax, because then our response doesn't have to be a verbal response.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's an energetic being.
I can't remember which podcast we talked about this, but um, I, used to listen to Eckhart Tolle,
Yeah, yeah,
right? And then he'll say, when you're with somebody, just feel your hands, feel your feet or whatever, be in your body. And it's not that you have to listen to all the words that the other person is saying. Like listening means to be there for that person, like be present in that moment, and yeah, I feel like I do have a fear of not catching all the literal meaning of what the other person is saying. And I was like telling you earlier, like I was talking to my friend and I quite didn't get what she was trying to say, but it's that nonverbal thing. Like I could tell that she was uncomfortable. She, and maybe that's why I didn't understand what she was saying, because she couldn't spell it out completely, because she didn't want to spell it out or something.
yeah,
But that, like you're saying, it's enough to just be there for that person. Like I sensed this uneasiness from
mhm,
her. And yeah, it is enough just to be there in the same presence,
yeah,
you know?
yeah.
And I think that's why you bring this thing over and over about, like, yeah, deep listening is really about being present. And yeah.
It's intriguing though to think about why we're trained to emphasize the words. Why are you, human beings, so fixated on language, or we're taught that I guess it goes back to that intellect, like, because we're processing language through here, I guess,
Mhm.
and the rest of it is forgotten. But it's the body that, for me too, especially in my journey. I mean, I think, and about receptivity, to receive love, and even the whole concept of divine feminine. The receptivity part is the feminine part, right? It's not the doing, it's the sitting and being, and which isn't necessarily female or male. It's a yin yang piece, right? It's sort of so, but we all need to develop that receptivity, right? To just be.
We talked about this thing. I told you earlier in the podcast.
I'm just going to tell you that the recording is off for a second, and think that an internet might be unstable, but it'll come back on. So if you have something poignant to say, maybe give it a second, or
Okay.
Yeah, now it's back.
Okay. So maybe we didn't talk in the podcast, but I came here when I was 18 from Japan, and I experienced so many occasions where people will say, "What do you think, Aiko? What's your opinion?" And in college, same thing. Like you have to, in this culture, Western culture, you have to be able to be explicit, explain things, use right words to be able to communicate. And that is important, of course, in certain settings, especially, more so than the other, right? And coming from Japan, I'm kind of like, I don't really have my opinions, about this. I don't know what I think about this, But soon I realized that in this society, it is not positive if you don't have a clear opinions about something. To say, well, I don't know, is like you're either dumb or you don't care or something, right? And
Right.
because I was in college, I was reinforced even more to be specific, detailed, explicit. And I remember when I was in undergraduate, I took speech communication class, and part of my major was speech communication. Actually, it was cross-cultural communication. So that's when I go, oh, I know why I don't, I hadn't really developed my own opinions because I'm from Japan, or, I'm from this country. And like in Western culture, they emphasize this. Other culture, we emphasize more of a general feelings, and to to be explicit too much is actually not a good thing in other cultures. So I really feel like I took that idea. I'm in this country, I have to be explicit. If I'm hungry, I have to say, look, I'm hungry. Do you have something I can eat?
Right.
Otherwise I'm gonna have hypoglycemia or something.
Right.
In Japan, I probably didn't have to say anything because people are more intuitive, so they will offer something, or and so yeah, my being totally shifted, right? And then when you're saying, like, it's interesting, like, why do we have to think that we, like, that listening becomes more of a mental thing? And men and women also have that same thing. Women are a lot more intuitive listener, so yeah, part of me kind of feel like, yeah, I lost that part of me to just sort of sit back and then take in of what people are saying, rather than always feeling like I have to respond.
Right. Because it's also seen as passive, right?
Yeah.
It's like you don't want to be a passive person, the stereotypes of women as being passive and Asian culture being passive, right? I mean, those are stereotypes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But in everything, there's beauty, right? It's if
Mhm.
I guess, that's talking from the pattern point of view, or a we need the flexibility to be either or. We need to be
Right.
able to go places, and that's why we're learning from each other, right?
Mhm.
As human beings, um, when something becomes rigid as a fundamental way of being, and everything else becomes wrong because it
Mhm.
doesn't fit that fundamental way of being, that's when we get into these troubles. And that's,
Mhm.
going back to this idea of we're meeting parts of ourselves. In the voice dialogue work, you can have hundreds of parts of yourself, literally, and you're meeting those parts, you're talking to those parts, but you're not trying to make one part wrong or right. But this is what we do. This is what we're taught. We identify with some parts, the good mother, or the good person, or the hard worker, the delicate soul, uh,
Mhm.
and then we reject the relaxer, we reject the judger, we reject um, uh, the lazy one. We have words for those things that are the opposite energy. We reject the powerful one. Uh,
Mhm.
you know, in my own life, I think I've really rejected the the powerful female energy. It's sort of like, and it's a very instinctual energy
Mhm.
versus, so it's in female, instinctual, sexual, whatever you want to call it. But the 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 part that's that has been strong in me is the good one, the one
Mhm.
that understands and is compassionate and kind. I love that part of myself, but that doesn't mean that I don't get to really notice that there's this other part that
Right.
has
Yeah.
to live as much, Mm. And so there's parts of ourselves, like even when I was describing the 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 YouTube channel I was watching, I met my judger, and I met my survivor, and I met my lover of humans. It's sort of like all in this story of this person. Yeah.
Mhm.
And I didn't have an agenda to respond to him, right? I was just listening to his
Mhm.
story, but I met all of these things.
Yeah.
Just interesting to think about that. It's a passive channel, right? I'm watching, you could
Mhm.
argue I'm watching TV, right? But I was in there with him, and my heart was responding to him.
Mhm. You know, one time I was talking with somebody and along the line of this topic of, okay, so when we meet somebody that we judge, so let's say I'm talking with somebody and then this person is saying something or did something and I judge this person. Um, and that I have that part, so I'm kind of seeing myself in this person. And some people don't like that idea, right? Because I let's say I'm interacting with this person who is um, maybe not on time, always late, right? And then I'm like, "Ugh," I'm waiting and waiting and waiting. And then this person is always late. And, so I judge, right? And then somebody will say, well, you're judging, but you have that, you're kind of seeing yourself in that person too. So then I might go, I'm not late,
Mhm.
I'm always on time or
Mhm.
something like that.
Mhm. Mhm.
So that's not true, that, that mirror concept is not true. And years ago, that's how I felt. It's like, okay, my husband is so forgetful. He's just like never on time, forgets all the time. I'm not like that, right?
Mhm.
But somebody was saying, it's not that I'm not like that, but that I reject, like I criticize, like I think that's a bad thing.
Right.
And I have that part. So
Yeah.
I judge that part of me. That's why I'm not late, because I think being late is a bad thing, or being forgetful all the time is
Right.
not a bad thing. I mean, it's a bad thing.
Right.
So not that I don't have that part, but I'm judging and I'm disowning those parts. So I don't do that, but that doesn't mean I don't have it, right?
Right. Right. Right.
So I just thought that, that's a cool way to explain to people, because it helped me to realize that's what it was. That it's not that, like, if you meet a killer, you're not a killer, you know. I mean, if you haven't killed anybody, but it's that we all have it. It's just that we might not do it, but we have it, and then we judge that part of ourselves as a bad thing.
Yeah.
So I don't know, I just wanted to bring that up because
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
that's kind of an important part.
In the voice dialogue, that's exactly what they're talking about too, right? Because there's the selves we identify with, and then there's the selves we disown, and you just use that word. So there's a disowned self, right? So, and the disown, in the way the disowned self is either you judge very harshly something, or you overvalue it in somebody, like, oh, she's so brilliant, I could never be like her, it's like there's something in there that's being under not recognized about yourself, right? Like or that you don't own about yourself,
Right.
So yeah, like where you project onto, and like, I've always really been intrigued by women and everybody. When Lady Di died,
Yeah.
everybody was like so mourning left and right. I was like, really? Like that was so intriguing to me. But what I got was that people, a couple of things. I think one was that people had all this grief that they needed to discharge, and they needed to find a place to put it. But the other was to glamorize or idealize this human being in a way, because they weren't owning those parts of themselves.
Right.
They needed to see it out in the world. But I think that's literally everything.
Yeah.
Especially our responses to it, if they're not equal, if they're not grounded in grounded compassion, if we have response of rejecting or pulling it in, it's because it's something in ourselves that's not fully alive and here, and that we don't want to face that, because that's like a deep piece of work, right? To keep going that way. And when you said the conscious response, we could just make it simple, like, you are part of me. You could just make it a simple statement like that. You're part of me. Or I see you as part of me. Or I see you.
Yeah.
And I remember, the other modality of nonviolent communication, which was started by Marshall Rosenberg. He said a statement that I kind of thinking about just now, like he said that, I don't know if I'm quoting it right, but he said, a judgment is just a unmet need, crying out, something like that. And so, because he was all about feelings, needs, and requests, and needs, identifying core needs. And so there's underneath that judgment is, like, say I'm going to take like, that person is self-destructive, or that person is addicted, or that person is, I don't know, I'm just exploring, so I don't even have an exact place I'm going. But if I have that judgment and I'm not owning that I have those parts of myself, then I'm not acknowledging something about a need of mine, like I have this deep need to be seen and felt unconditionally, loved unconditionally, connected unconditionally,
Right.
and I'm covering it up by judging something so I don't have to feel it. I don't have to feel myself.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to feel my own need. I don't have to feel what I am rejecting. I'm judgment is a way to keep ourselves from being vulnerable to our own needs,
Oh, exactly. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I'm trying to take the meaning of that back into myself, like what, so I can feel it. Like, what is that? You know, like when you reject your, yeah, judgment is a rejection, right? It's rejection of the other or yourself. And when you do like the work of Byron Katie and the turnaround, right? You don't want to go too early to them. But but that turnaround too is, it's like
Yeah.
to see yourself honestly.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's always like you want to face that, you know?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
I just had this vision of
Just gonna get a tissue. Excuse me.
yeah. Once in a while I get to meet Japanese, fellow Japanese people. And the more I want to say pure Japanese they are, more they, the less they're Americanized, you know. Like every time I kind of think of those Japanese people who are less Americanized that I have interaction with, I don't know what they're really thinking, because they'll be just go,
Uh-huh.
so this guy, I see, And this Americanized part of myself is like, they're like pretending like they're listening, but they must be judging me, in some way or something, right? But like, I just had this feeling like, usually I'm comforted by their just being there and responding like that, like, interesting. But they'll never say, but that's a bad way to do, or that doesn't sound right, or they won't have that kind of reactions. And also I just have this like feeling of there's less quick of a judgment. Maybe they might have some kind of judgment, but their judgment is a lot more subdued. And it's like, I might not do that, but she did, but that's, okay, kind of thing, right?
So let me, oh, go ahead. Sorry, you were
No,
gonna.
no, go ahead.
I
Oh,
was curious. So before you came to,
wait, wait, let
sure,
me
sure.
take this out. Go. Sorry.
So before you said you came to this country 18. So before that, you were, say, not Americanized, right?
Right.
So how was when you were doing, interesting. What was your state of judgment there? Were you judging very much? What was
Not
your,
very much, just, because like I said, I didn't have the habit of forming opinions so much.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, of course, if somebody said, so let's say like, when I was younger, if I saw somebody stealing something or heard that, a friend of ours did something wrong, I might have an opinion, like if it's really obvious or something. But I don't know, maybe it was if it was just me or not, but it more like I tend to interpret things like that from maybe the other person's point of view. And I think it's because my mother always said, just think about, put yourself in the other person's, shoe. That was kind of the thing. So maybe I had that training, but it was in general, it was like, okay, some kind of political thing, or some things like that. Maybe these kids are arguing about something, and other other kids are talking about that, and then but I would not really form too quick of an opinion, because that just wasn't something that I did, or
Right, right. Yeah, it's just really interesting to think about the implications of that, right?
Yeah.
Because you're trained to judge, we're trained to have opinions,
Mhm.
we're trained to make those opinions known.
Yeah.
And the more you do it, the stronger that groove grows in your brain. But it's not like you might not be judging. I mean, if as a person, say you only grew up in Japan and then you did the work of Byron Katie, your judgments might just not be as intense, or it might not come to you as quickly. Like as
Mhm.
in me, I fire away with judgment. I
Yeah.
like to make fun of myself at how judgmental I can be so
Yeah.
quickly. But it's this sort of it's not like the judgment isn't there, but it's not required of you at every moment.
Yeah. And as I'm saying this, within any culture, there's like a judgment. Like, in Japan, that expression of the nail that sticks out need to be
Yeah, yeah,
hammered down,
yeah,
So yeah, probably like if somebody did something out of cultural norm, people will judge them harshly, like people who went to war, World War II, if those kamikaze,
yeah, yeah.
pilots, if they came back, they were judged harshly because they didn't die in the war,
Uh,
right? So I just have to retract the part. I mean, I guess I'm not exactly saying that Japanese people are not judgmental. It's
yeah,
just that
no, I don't hear that. Yeah.
yeah, maybe general forming of opinions are not as expected, you know.
And or the disowned selves, the parts so when you talk about the inner critic, every culture has the things that it harshly criticizes
Yeah,
and harshly disowns,
right.
right? Like, for example, Latin cultures are much more free with the body, and stereotypically, right? Like there's a comfort with the sexuality that,
Right.
say, like it's not part of like Muslim culture,
Mhm.
like it's not okay to have that kind of, you know, and so so this is the nature, back to a projection, right? With judging other people, judging other groups, judging other cultures, judging other I don't know what else, but other it's like we don't own all of this parts of ourselves, and we want to put it on somebody else because we can't face that we've either rejected those parts of ourselves, or we've disowned those parts of ourselves. We don't want to be reminded of those parts of ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And yet this is where we have just the power of learning from each other, right? But this is interesting too, when in this judgment places, one of the things that I've been struggling for the last couple of years, about believing differently than other people, and feeling like if you believe and think differently than other people, you'll get rejected. And that's part of all of our upbringings. And then, but mine in particular, in a certain way, I had some struggle with that. Like it wasn't like if you thought differently than other people, had different spiritual and other kind of beliefs. I was put in a lot of situations, whether it's my family situation or being an immigrant in this country, a little girl in Maine, whether in the whitest state in the nation kind of thing, where you thought differently or were different, and you just couldn't express that and be safe in expressing that.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of losing my train of thought there, but um, um, that, yes, I kind of lost my train of thought.
That's okay. That's okay.
Like, let's edit this part out.
Yeah.
Or not.
But maybe
Yeah.
let's just, maybe we couldn't wrap it up, but before we do that, I thought maybe we could talk about, let's say, so something's reflecting and getting a reflection there. Just, oh, sorry. There we go. So let's say like I encounter somebody and have a conversation. I don't like something about that person or what he or she said, or I make, I feel like, oh my gosh, that person is so energetic or so beautiful or so smart, and I react to that. So then I just kind of want to go step by step. Then I just open up to go, okay, wow, it would be interesting if I can just see that I'm meeting part of myself through this person. One, we can drop judgment, during the interaction that we have, because I brought it to myself, right?
Mhm.
And then I become kind of interested in, well, let's just use, judgment, because that's
Yeah.
the easiest. And I'm like really feeling judgmental about this person saying this or having this kind of opinion about something else. And then I notice, oh, what part of myself is this? Right. And I'm like, I don't do that, or I don't make judgment about this kind of thing, or I'm not judgmental, but I'm like, okay, but I am meeting myself through this interaction, so there must be somewhere. And I guess I don't have to process that during that moment, because we're just having, conversation, but just noticing it.
Yeah.
Interesting, there's this reflection there. And then later on, I go, well, no, that was interesting. I noticed that there was this mirroring happening, reflection happening. I want to kind of think about that.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I journal,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe I talk to you, other friends, and I go, yeah. Then I learn about myself.
Mm-hmm.
So that's sort of what happens when we get to do that, right?
Yeah, yeah. It sort of sounds like you're asking the question was, how do we get out of that trap of judging or
Yeah, or that is sort of what would happen if we allow ourselves to
yeah,
go in there.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah. Probably depends on the severity of the judgment, right?
right.
Because you might really be disgusted with something, or it might just be a thought that just sort of kind of fades out or in,
Yeah,
and so some of those things require a lot more exploration and time,
right.
right? Yeah,
Yeah,
but they're all kind of clues as to where you need to do some work, right?
Mhm.
And so we can then use whatever modalities we want, right? I think the work of Byron Katie is an excellent modality to get at that, because it always leads you home to yourself. You don't want to take shortcuts to go to the turnaround, but if that's all you have, then better to go to the turnaround than, if you can be honest, because you might just reject it and say, that person is just a bad person, and like something like that, and then you have to turn it around and, I'm a bad person, and then you have to look, you might not want to look at that, so it just sort of depends on how
yeah,
honest you are with yourself.
yeah. And then I guess like what I didn't say, the process that I was describing at the end. Let's say, I'm a bad person because I also judge other people, then it's like, it's true, you come to realization, but then also just realizing, yes, I have that part of myself, but that's okay, because that's to become whole,
Mhm.
not partial, but
Right.
whole. I have
Right.
good side, bad side, which good side, bad side
Right,
is
right,
only
right.
a human construct.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, just realizing I have all those parts. I can be lazy, but I can be hardworking. I can be judgmental, but I can be very understanding. And then by allowing myself to go, oh, I noticed that. Yeah, it's not just her. I have that too. I'm recognizing that shadow side and that part. And every time I don't want to even use forgive, because but every time I realize that that is part of me and that I can accept it, you know, then every time I do that, then I become more and more whole each time.
Right, right, right. Yeah, that's a good place to end.
Yeah.
Oh, I like that. I become more and more whole each time. Um, I guess I just have this one last thought, which we talked about. Remember about awareness. It's like becoming aware
Yeah.
of the whole.
Right.
Not the goal is not to change
Yeah.
and manipulate.
Mhm.
It's to become aware
Yeah.
and make decisions from the place of awareness.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, yeah. Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for listening.
Yes.
Until next time.